welcome to this dinner of the Geopolitical Cartographer. President Ranil Wickremesinghe, founder and patron of the Geopolitical Cartographer, our co-patron, former president and current speaker of the Maldives, President Nasheed, Dr. Madhav, Professor Geoffrey, Foreign Minister Ali Sabri, Chief of Defense General Shavendra Silva, Navy Commander Vice Admiral Priyantha Pereira, State Minister Foreign Affairs Tharaka Balasurya, Honorable Ruan Wijewardena, Senior Advisor to the President, Foreign Secretary Aruni Wijewardena, Excellencies and representatives of the diplomatic community, members of the Geopolitical Cartographer, business leaders, and family. On behalf of the Geopolitical Cartographer, it is indeed my pleasure to once again welcome everyone to one of our events. The Geopolitical Cartographer is a research foundation specializing in the Indian Ocean. It aims to promote the study, research, and analysis of the geopolitical, geoeconomic, and maritime affair developments in the Indian Ocean, the Pacific Ocean, and the connected landmass, which are redrawing the global political order. Today's event is a dinner, so we will start with the starters, and thereafter we'll have a few speeches, and I'll be coming up occasionally to introduce the various speakers. Please enjoy the night. Ended. Please welcome Dr. Madhav.
Thank you, Rishant. Excellency President Shri Wickremesinghe, Madam President, Excellency Mr. Nasheed, dignitaries and dear friends. It's an unenviable job while you are all eating. So some food for your stomach, but also some food for thought. I'm happy that a new think tank by name Geopolitical Cartographer has come up in Colombo in Sri Lanka with the blessings of Excellency Ranil Wickremesinghe and many others here. We in South Asia are individually great philosophers. We have produced many great statesmen. You take any country in our region, India, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, all of us have great statesmen who have given great ideas to the whole world. But unfortunately, we have never been able to develop institutionalized thinking in our part of the world. When institutional thinking is needed, we always look up to the West. We look up to those think tanks, their research, their activity. But of late, both in India as well as in our neighborhood like in Sri Lanka, many such good think tanks are coming up. I also work with a think tank in Delhi, so we will be happy to collaborate with the new institution that has come up here. As I said, even otherwise, President Excellency Ranil Wickremesinghe has been a great supporter of our initiatives right from the beginning. We always focused on our region here, and I'm sure the new institution that is coming up also will focus on the region, immediate region in which we all live, with which our futures are tied. One important reason that we all should focus on this region is the evolving global scenario also. Lot of changes are happening. What we thought would be the new order that would emerge seems to be now completely collapsing. New kind of issues are coming up. New wars are taking shape. Luckily, this region, our region, namely the Indian Ocean region, remains largely untouched by these conflicts. Being untouched also helps in playing a role in addressing or resolving some of these challenges, provided we start working together, thinking together, working together, and coming up with credible ideas and credible views. In that sense, probably we can do much more together as a region. I'm happy that when the institution was introduced, Rishan said we will focus on Indian Ocean region. We will be very happy to work with Sri Lanka because India and Sri Lanka, we don't see us as two peoples. We are of course two countries, two political institutions, but we are one people. Excellency yesterday said we are one civilization. We are cultural cousins. So in that sense, it's always easy. We understand each other so well, and India always held the Sri Lankan leadership in very high esteem. President Wickremesinghe enjoys great respect in Indian system. We would be happy to work with Sri Lanka on all those issues. You all know that India is doing fairly well nowadays in economy, in terms of many other issues also. But when India rises, India under Prime Minister Modi has this formula that when we rise, we should rise together with our neighbors. India's rise should help its neighbors, and we generally expect that when the neighbors rise, when there are things happening in our neighborhood, they should also help India grow peacefully and without any difficulties. President Nasheed is here. We were discussing about the outcome of the elections. I mean, we all will probably living in the same region, we all will have to grow together, move together, and we have to address great global challenges. So in that, we all have to work together. That will be the India's focus, and I'm sure in that spirit, we will all be able to continue to work together. My best wishes to this new institution that has come up, and beyond, of course, dinners and all. There was an excellent Gaul dialogue co-hosted by this institution and the Sri Lankan Navy. I was there. It was a great comeback event after a couple of years. I'm sure in these intellectual activities, we will be able to work together in coming years. Thank you for inviting me and giving this opportunity to me. My greetings and namaskar. Enjoy your dinner, please. Thank you.
He became the Maldives' first democratically elected president after a campaign of non-violent civil disobedience pressured the nation's longest-serving ruler to allow political pluralism in 2008. His advocacy for human rights and democracy extends to being recognized as an Amnesty International prisoner of conscience. Today, former President Nasheed will speak, I hope, about the Indian Ocean and the Maldives elections and the expeditions of the new government agenda.
Good evening, President Ranil, Wickremesinghe, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. It's always a pleasure to be in Sri Lanka and in Colombo. This is, for many of us, our second home. Colombo is the biggest Maldives city outside Male. So we feel very much at home here. And thank you very much for that. When I speak here tonight, this evening, in front of me, our chief guest is President Ranil Wickremesinghe. Since childhood, I had known the name of His Excellency, and in so many crucial moments in my personal life and my country's personal life, the President has intervened for the better for our country and also for myself, and I thank the President for all those instances. I will not spell them out. We've just had our elections in the Maldives. These elections were characterized by international media as a candidate that had won, a pro-China candidate, apparently won those elections. And apparently the pro-India candidate lost the elections. And then journalists ring me and keep asking me about election results. So I said, but I supported the winning candidate. I this time did not support the incumbent, my friend, but I supported the opposition candidate, and he won. And it's very difficult for me to characterize him as pro anything, China or India. I think he is very pro Maldives. And I think our elections would bring our candidates, Maldive candidates, Maldive issues, what should happen to peace and security and prosperity of the people of the Maldives. And I'm sure that whoever comes to government in the Maldives would be that. President Yamin followed a foreign policy that was more tilted towards the east and towards China. But President Solih came in and pursued a foreign policy that was India first. But then again, this India first foreign policy was coined by President Yamin. President Yamin himself coined the phrase India first. But then later on, for whatever reason, some people tell me the reason was me, because he arrested me and India backed me, and then he didn't like India because of that. And so therefore there was all sorts of disagreements. But he tilted towards China. And then in 2018, we won the election with a more Western-minded foreign policy candidate, who was President Solih. And he completed his 5 years. And then when we went into the recent elections, President Yamin was in prison, and he was not able to contest. And therefore, his party fielded a candidate. And a lot of us assumed that this candidate was against India, which, in my mind, is a very, very wrong characterization. The President-elect has spoken to President Ranil, and I am hopeful that President Ranil will visit our inauguration. And I am very confident that come the next 5 years, we will be able to pursue a foreign policy that is in line with Sri Lanka, India, and South Asia. In 1441, when General He was outside Malé with 20,000 troops, Vasco da Gama was just rounding the Cape of Good Hope. The Ming dynasty fell, and General He left a whole lot in the Maldives, especially in the island of Kinolas. And they hurriedly left. And then again, we see that they want to come back. And in my mind, we have a society, and I am speaking here. Rishan is running our society. I'm very fortunate to work with President Ranil in this society. And it's called the South Asia Chart Maker, Cartographer. We in the Maldives, we sit in the middle of the Indian Ocean. We are 1,000 miles from north to south. We occupy most of the navigable parts of the Indian Ocean. And there's a map, a 11th century chart drawn by a Maldivian navigator, a Sri Lankan chart, a chart of Sri Lanka. And he thought there was a river that passes through Panadura all the way up to Trinco. So he was kind of thinking Sri Lanka more like with atolls. So he had ocean running throughout Sri Lanka. And now we are again trying to draw a better map of the Indian Ocean. I am sometimes at a loss to find where the Pacific comes here. Indo-Pacific, apparently we are. But that's millions, miles away. We like to focus our attention on our prosperity and on our development and on our betterment. And that lies with stronger democratic countries in South Asia. I think most of our countries will have elections that will go either way. But whichever way they go, we will still remain South Asians. And Sri Lanka would still be our next door neighbor, our biggest neighbor, and India will be our biggest neighbor. And life will continue. I don't think that it benefits any one of us to characterize us as either India or China. We are us. We are together. And I am hopeful that with the Colombo conclave discussions, that we can continue these discussions and see that this region remains peaceful. We are again coming to this situation where there is a superpower rift in the middle of the Indian Ocean. We are sandwiched in the middle. The Maldives certainly is. Sri Lanka, with its bigger population, is able to deal with it better. And in my mind, we will only deal with it with Sri Lanka together. For our new inauguration, I'm hopeful that the Seychelles president would also come. And the Sri Lankan president also would come. And we will have this discussion. Where South Asia is for us, Indian Ocean is ours. We live here. It's no one else's. Yes, they can all use it. They can cross it. They can trade with it. They can buy from it. They can do anything with it. But we live here. It's our ocean. And I'm sure it will remain our ocean. Thank you very much.
wasn't mentioned, of course, ladies and gentlemen and excellencies, is that I'm a last-minute stand-in who wrote this speech on a notebook I happen to have with me in the back of a car on the way here. And I arrived 5 minutes before the President, so there we are. I warn you. Anyway, I've just come from the Gaul Dialogue, and it seems to me that one of the issues at the Gaul Dialogue was, who do we belong to? Who do we relate to? What's our sense of community? And I think I could detect two kinds of visions that were emerging in the Gaul Dialogue. The one was what we'd expect, since it was principally occupied by naval officers. There was a community of naval officers who have a lot to do with each other, a lot in common, because they're all battling with a common adversary, the sea. But there was a sub-theme to it as well, and that's the Indian Ocean region. The sense that there is a community in the Indian Ocean, maybe to be distinguished from the Indo-Pacific, that needs to think about who it actually relates to. And I thought that's really, that sense of community, that sense of identity, is what I might explore a little bit this evening in front of you. I think globally, as well as locally, you can detect two trends that in a sense are operating against each other in trying to identify who we associate with as people and as countries. The first trend seems to me to be quite clearly what's sometimes called strategic autonomy. In other words, separateness. Separateness that can either be national or mini-regional, if you like. It's a sense of wanting to be able to control one's own destiny, to be able to make the decisions that are going to decide what your future is going to be, and not to be beholden to some faceless decision maker in some other part of the world. I think it's also often associated with a real sense of identity. Who are we? Where do we come from? In a sense, it's kind of goes deep. It goes deep into the past. It goes deep into recorded memory. Maybe a constructed past, actually, not even the real one, but a sense that that's what makes us what we are, and that's what's going to guide us as to who we're going to associate with in the future. And I think you can see plenty of evidence of that kind of thing. And I'm not saying it's right, and I'm not saying it's wrong, but I think you can see evidence of it in everywhere in the world. Back in my own country, I would argue that Brexit was in part driven by this kind of feeling. Who are we, islanders? Are we really European, or are we separate from that? But I think you can see it too in France, where there is talk of strategic autonomy, not being wholly beholden to the United States, and everywhere else in Europe as well. And this kind of tension between this kind of national, downwards-looking sense of community, as opposed to the alternative, which is thinking wider rather than deeper. It's thinking about extending that sense of community kind of geographically in the past, if you like. And it leads to, I think, maybe associated with a growing sense of nationalism. I think you can see it in Mr. Modi's India, for example, in a way that we couldn't 15, 20 years ago. But I think it's very common. I think you can see evidence all over the place. But I also think it operates below the level of the state. I think new technology has a huge impact on our capacity to perhaps control our own destiny. You know, the social media, the sense of there is a group out there that we can communicate using this new technology to operate in rather different ways than we have in the future. In a sense, this is kind of narrowing the gap between the small group, the sub-state group, if you like, and the state group. And sadly, I think, since I was invited at least to mention what's happening in Israel and Palestine at the moment, I think that's what we can see there. Hamas have been empowered by the new technology. We're all amazed, well, the Israelis are at any rate, by their apparent success in initially, at any rate, launching that attack on Israel. A lot of it is due to the new technology. Here you had a classic battle between fixed ideas and fixed installations, which the Israelis were so confident about that they didn't think close human monitoring was necessary. We can rely on the technology to keep us safe. But that same technology provides drones. And that same technology can work out where the weak spots in those defenses are. That technology can identify where the remaining decision makers are. And that new technology can provide Hamas, a group, whatever you think of them, who are less than the state, although they want to be, of course, with the capacity to take on one of the most well-prepared militaries in the world. It's narrowed the gap. And in a sense, that's another example of a sort of community that's empowered to be narrow and to focus on immediate concerns and to be in a much better position to do that. So that's one trend. I think there's another trend as well, and that's to think outwards. It's to think that communities expand rather than reduce, and that that's likely to be the way to go. And it seems to me that there is a kind of escalation, a kind of self-defeating element to this earlier version of the narrowing of the sense of community, because it leads to behaviors that become self-generating. It causes countries to behave in a certain way that is likely to set up concerns and worries from their neighbours, and so to reinforce and extend great power competition, small power competition, and all the rest of it. But the alternate vision is to say, no, technology actually makes us global. I can get out my phone now and talk to my daughter. And cyber has no boundaries, and nor does the new technology. It makes us all a global village, as Marshall McLuhan said decades ago, in a real way that we've not been before, and that we have to think globally simply because of where technology is going. And I think there are several other reasons why one might suppose that that's the way things are going. Partly it's maybe a sort of growing sense of the disadvantage of the alternate. Things like wars, for example, in Ukraine and Israel and Palestine at the moment. But also a sense that we're all confronted with some major problems where the only solution is collective. And the one that most immediately leaps to mind after this summer's events, of course, is climate change. But also pandemics. But it's also running the world economy in a way that is sustainable over the long term. And all of these things drive us to think outwards, to make connections with other parts of the world and other groups below and above the level of the traditional nation state. So really what my message is that I think in the Indian Ocean region, as everywhere else, there's a kind of competition going on between these two visions of what the community actually is. And in a sense, whether the Indian Ocean region thinks of itself as a sub-region or thinks of itself as a group of mini regions within a sub-region, I think is really key. So I think what we're really confronting with, when we look at the future of this region, as the rest of the world as well, raises a question: which of those senses of community is likely to prevail? Are we going to see a process of slow coalescence into subgroups, bigger groups, and so on? Or are we going to see the reverse, where we disintegrate, if you like, into smaller groups that might or might not be in contention with one another? If you look at somewhere like the Indian Ocean region, it reminds me of the old jibe about NATO. The only thing that actually united the Europeans was dislike of Russia and fear of Russia. But one thing that was awkward for them was the fact that NATO was one giant and 14 dwarfs. So how do you kind of reconcile that, bearing in mind the great power of India in the Indian Ocean region? So, you know, that seems to me to be something to think about. But whatever it is, I think the future is going to be really hard to call. I'm an academic. I come up with questions, not answers. And effectively, I'm saying that's the question that confronts us. That's the issue that's in front of us. And nobody knows what the answer to it is. And I think what we're seeing in many parts of the world are people being reluctant to make a choice between the two. Engaging in policies that maintain options. Engaging in policies that look to other people like hedging. In other words, not hitching their star to any particular wagon, but trying to maintain friends with everybody in order to maintain as much autonomy as possible. But I'm just going to stop this by simply coming up with what I think are maybe the long-term trends. It does seem to me that avoiding choices becomes increasingly difficult, where some of the choices are associated with countries that are behaving in egregious ways as far as you're concerned. If they're kind of violating democratic values, for example, that you have, it becomes more difficult to treat them equally with everybody else. That's one reason. Despite the kickback against the restrictions that are going to come to all of us, whether we like it or not, to try and restrain climate change, I think the urgency and the extent of climate change is bound to drive us together in the long run, simply from a question of mere survival. And then finally, I think that other agency of change that's pushing us to the wider concept of community rather than the national, the subnational, or even the local, is economic interrelationships. We read a lot at the moment about the troubles of globalization, the growth of protectionism, especially in reaction to the damage done by the COVID pandemic. But it does seem to me that when we're moving into an era of technological connectivity that's completely unparalleled, that globalization is bound to benefit from this in the end. And when we see more and more evidence of what is sometimes called consecutive specialized production, where goods are shuffled around between various countries with everybody adding value at every stage of the process, as you see all over Europe, for example, it seems to me that the trend is in that greater, wider direction. But I'm just an academic. I'm only asking questions. And I think a lot of you are the ones who are going to provide the answers. So thank you very much.
Former President Nasheed, Dr. Ram Mahadeva, Minister of Foreign Affairs, Professor Geoffrey, Commander of the Navy, and friends. When I was asked to speak, I asked Rishan, now what am I to do? We have run out of all the topics. He said, there's still one left. You can't talk of Hamas and Israel. Well, actually, it is an important event. I think what happens when I spoke yesterday, I said, I don't know what will happen today. And frankly, what happens in the next few days will most probably determine our immediate future, if not our long-term future. When Hamas attacked Israel, all our sympathies were with Israel. Sri Lanka, which had always supported Palestine, said no, this has to be condemned. So did many others. Then Israel, it took a day or two, because I think firstly before the survival of Israel was the survival of Netanyahu government. So, but by the time he got his act together, it was a question of going into Gaza. And the bombing of Gaza began. So there have been many, many questions. There were those who felt, most probably in most of the Middle East, other Muslim countries, that Israel should be condemned. And others said, no, Israel has suffered, let's see what this means. So the bombing is over now. In the meantime, Secretary of State Blinken went in there. America has announced its stand. Now we find that Israel has announced over 1 million people in Gaza, from North Gaza, has to move to the south. Now this in turn has drawn condemnations, not only from the UN, from the African countries, and even from some of the European countries. So what happens next? If the people of Gaza has been asked to move out, it means Israel will move in. Why had the people of Gaza been moved out? Why was Gaza bombed? I mean, done with a purpose. I don't think Israel just went on a rampage. They thought that bombing Gaza, the buildings, bringing them down, was the first stage of cleaning out the tunnels in which Hamas is hiding. So if they go in and find Hamas and they fight, as one issue. What happens if they go in and find that the Hamas is missing? I used to always think, last few days, why did Hamas do this? A brutal murder. I mean, it's a massacre, it's something more than that. There was a reaction, they wanted a reaction. What is the reaction Hamas wanted? They would have wanted Israel to come into Gaza. Otherwise, you would just go and spoil your reputation by shooting up innocent civilians who are enjoying themselves. So what is the strategy? After all, Hamas can't win in outright battle with Israel. So this is the next stage that we have to look into. The picture looks pretty bleak. If you go in there, you will create another issue in the whole of Middle East, into the whole of the Muslim world, and thereafter. Middle East means it will be unstable, the prices will be up, oil prices, others will all be affected. Within the Middle East, many governments may not be safe. What happened to those who took part in the Abrahamic Accords? I think it's a good thing, but nevertheless, it's become a bad issue now. How do you handle it? You go down all the way down to Indonesia on this side, all the way down to Central Africa on the other side, into countries like Zanzibar, small but important islands. How do you control it? What happens? And there are countries like us with significant Muslim populations. All those countries, if the governments have to go with the popular sympathy. What I'm finding, I'm surprised, is the amount of support that Palestine is getting in places like Europe and America, where the campuses are divided. Now there's a big difference between 9/11 and this. Everyone sympathized with Israel at the beginning. But will that be there next week? Everyone sympathized with USA at 9/11. Whatever support they lost was a year or two after. So how are you going to, what will be the position in our part of the world? In the Indian Ocean, that will be the worst affected. We've got to think of it. What do governments do? There are limited options available for them, especially if the Hamas is not found or destroyed in Gaza. If you go in and destroy the Hamas, catch the leaders, there may be something to be said. But do you think they did this to be caught? That's the point. And more than that, the global geopolitics is what I am concerned of. How are we going to do this? Can US manage Ukraine, Taiwan, and the Middle East? Gaza, I don't think. If you are going to have 2 aircraft carrier groups in the Mediterranean, that's serious. Can you manage it? It's going to be difficult, because many issues are going to rise. The present administration went back on a lot of issues implemented by President Clinton, President Bush, the Washington Consensus. President Bush has moved to Asia, followed by President Obama, and in its own way, though he was eccentric, President Trump. Now, in my view, I may be wrong, you dismantle that. That order has been dismantled. Firstly, China, taken on China. You've taken on Russia. Can you run this with the new Quad and UK? In the EU, there has been undermining of Germany and France. When US has gone in with the Eastern Europeans. What can Eastern European do when you are focused on Israel? So there can be a big change, a power balance, which is taking place. And unfortunately, in the midst of this, the Congress can't decide who the speaker is going to be. So this is what we are. If these actors, then the others will go on their own. US, I won't say it's primus inter pares, is not first among equals, is first among unequals. So you got to, are you going to maintain that position or not? Because if these attacks take place, and especially you don't find the Hamas leaders, and I'm of the view that Hamas should be punished. I'm not one who says it shouldn't be. The Hamas don't find the leaders. What is the consequence for the global economy, for the geopolitics? I mean, it's going to change. It's no longer a unipolar world. It's not a bipolar world. You need so many other factors. You can't ignore Asia. In the Indian Ocean, we count. So how are you going to manage? You take the Quad, for instance, India has good relations with the Middle East and with Russia. I don't think Japan will put its supply of fuel at peril. So these are all issues that everyone is talking of. Fortunately, at the moment, everyone is talking to each other. And there are a lot of backstage diplomacy that's going on. But what will happen once the Israeli army moves into Gaza, and especially if you don't find the Hamas leadership, is the $64 trillion question. I can't tell you what it is. But this can change the world, global order. It can bring in other players. Can the US then manage this order alone? At least the minimum is they've got to talk to everyone, keep it going. But then countries like China, Russia and all are going to ask, what is Israel doing in Gaza? Today the relationships are so strained that no one is going to help each other. When the attack took place, 9/11, the whole world rushed to the help of the US. I don't see that now. Each one is looking at their own interests and how they are going to survive. So you can find that global order which has been functioning in different ways for the last 50, 60 years as bipolar or unipolar, no longer responding. I think the first act is to ensure that the whole of the whole global geopolitical system can work together. I am surprised at some of the reactions that are taking place in different parts of the world. But those extreme reactions should not be allowed to hold sway, whether it's among the Islamic world or among the Israelis and the Jews or among the West. I was reading an interview or a speech by former President Trump. I'm not an admirer of his, but who said that the Hezbollah was smart. And people criticized for him, but obviously it was a smart move, what they made. And he said Netanyahu must be responsible for the failure in intelligence. And they criticized him again. But those are frank, basically, this is what all of us think. Not that we support Hamas or what they did, or Hezbollah, I don't support any of them. But firstly, we must all outside Israel and the Gaza come to us a solution. Then where do we go from here? Okay, I've said all this. I don't think Gaza and US will get together, or Israel can get together. I don't think you can even have a two-state solution. So what do you have? You have Israel that's functioning, Gaza that's destroyed, you have Palestine that is half functioning, and you have Lebanon that's also half functioning. At least got to take 4 states into. If you are going to look for a solution, establish 4 states, not for 2. And you got to think of Syria beyond that. So I think all I can say is it's time we started thinking anew. Going along the old grooves will not help us. Whichever way the events turn out in the next few days. Thank you.